Today we're going to be doing a service on the VW-T5. It's a 2.5 TDI engine. The engine code is the AXD. There's a few different engine codes out there, so you'll have to check your engine code to figure out what kind of service you need. I'm not going to do the complete service, I'm just going to do the basic oil change, the filter change, no brake fluid or coolant or anything like that. There's some other serviceable parts down here as well. There's something called the Gates couplings, which are basically small rubber belts that join the alternator and the air conditioning pump to the engine. This engine doesn't have a cam belt to service, it's a sprocket drive. Now that may sound good, but it does seem to be a bit of a problem on this engine, and it seems to chew through heads quite frequently. Okay, so what we'll start off with doing is draining the oil out. Then we're going to try and get to the oil filter, which is really difficult to get to. It's right down here underneath the power steering reservoir. This is the usual waste pan I use for collecting the oil from our vehicles, but this only holds about 6 litres or so of oil, and that's not actually enough. The 2.5 AXD does actually hold about 8.5 litres. I'll check that in a bit. So I'm actually going to use this heavy duty stacking container here, which will hold the whole lot in one go, and it will save me getting under there and having to put the drain plug in and out. I like to put something down on the ground here because it's quite likely we're going to get some oil on the drive. If we look down into the engine bay, this is the air filter box, which is on the left hand side as you look into the engine bay. This is the end of the engine. This is the pipe that comes up into the power steering pump. There's like a little work area here. And the oil filter, I don't know what genius thought this was a wise idea to do, absolutely ludicrous, but the oil filter is situated right down at arm's length. I can't even reach it yet. Right there, that's the oil filter housing. Right pain in the backside to get. In comparison to this Volkswagen EOS, where the oil filter is situated right here at the front of the engine, really easy to get to. First I'm going to undo this power steering reservoir. This is a 10mm bolt here, I believe. I'm going to just get a socket on that and undo that. Not too difficult. Make sure you don't lose these nuts and bolts. I'm going to put them on the front of the engine bay there. Then I'm going to unclip that. That just lifts up and out. There's a little clip underneath, and we can just move that over to one side, just out the way over there. The next thing I need to try and do is get this air hose off, and that's held in by these kind of clips. So you tend to get something under the clip, pull it up. Sometimes I pull it out from one side, and that should allow that, when it's pulled up, to pop out. Okay, be careful of these seals, because if they get damaged, your air system will leak oil. The Volkswagen TDIs are well known for putting oil in the air system. Now this next one down below is somewhat more difficult to get to. The clip is just accessible, but you kind of have to have a right look down there and get your hand in and lift that clip, which is on the back of the intercooler. Can just get the screwdriver in there while the camera's trying to focus, and then hopefully if we lift that clip up high enough we can lift this hose out. Okay, and then that comes out like so. This end, which is the bigger end that goes into the intercooler, is quite difficult to get back in, and again you can see there is a point of leak, so this one's leaking quite bad there. So what I'll probably do with this is clean that up, get all the oil off, and rub a little bit of seal around there. Not ideal. Now that the power steering reservoir and the air line is out of the way, we can get a better view of the filter down here in the most ridiculous place ever. It's at an angle, so I don't think you're going to get a socket on there easily. Certainly not going to get a spanner on there easily, but we're going to have to work out a way to get that out. This is the arrangement I'm going to use to get that filter out. I've got a 36mm socket down here. This one's quite often used for wheel nuts on drive shafts. I've then got a reducer down to an elbow joint here. I then have a short run up to another elbow joint, and then I've got about 40cm of extension bar and a long handled driver there. So I'm going to try and get that down and around a corner and get that onto the filter housing and undo it. Okay, so be careful popping this down here, you don't want to lose it. I'm going to guide the end onto the end of the housing. I'm going to tuck the bar in against the front of the engine bay, and then we're going to try and undo that. Now, it's probably wise to keep your hand on the other end, kind of keep it on there, because what you don't want it doing is rising up and damaging the filter housing. Okay, so you can see it's on the housing now. It rises up there, and wish me luck. Ah, there it goes. Popped open. And then before you completely remove this filter, I'd recommend that you make sure you've got something under the vehicle, because you're probably going to lose some oil onto the floor. I'm going to tuck everything out of the way, and now I'm going to try and undo the rest of this. It's quite fiddly. I must say it's one of the most difficult oil filters I've ever changed in my life, and I've changed probably 50 or 60 different vehicles' oil filters. Okay, so the top of the filter is coming out, and I think it's probably loose enough to do by hand now. Yeah. Straight away it's bound up on the air conditioning hoses and all the other hoses, so you're just going to have to pull it up past there. So I'm just going to pop a bit of towel up against the edge of the housing here, just to catch the majority of that oil coming out. The other thing I'm going to do is pull a bag down into this gap. Now you probably know that it's going to be easier to get this oil filter out if you take the front end of the vehicle off, i.e. the radiator, the bumper, everything off the front, but in reality, who's got the time or the patience to take the whole front end of the vehicle off? Okay, here we go, and it should lift out, and there's the filter with it. And now we can lift the bag out with the filter in. We do need to salvage the screw-on cap here that takes the filter. That's the spent filter there. We want to bag that up and dispose of that in accordance to your local regulations. So that will involve us taking that down our recycling centre, where they will take oil contaminated components. This part, we're going to give that a good clean out. Just a bit of paper towel. And there is a little O-ring on here, a little rubber ring that should have come with your new filter, and we can just take that off and replace it with a new one. If this part is damaged drastically, I would recommend replacing it, because the last thing you want to have happen is that actual round off or break off, and you end up with this cap stuck in your engine. While we're here, I also like to just give the housing a clean up, so a little bit around the outside and the threads on the inside. But you do want to be careful that you don't lose anything into the housing. You definitely don't want to be losing any paper in there, or nuts and bolts. That would be worst case scenario. But you can see the threads on there are quite grubby. Just giving them a bit of a clean should reduce any chance of having major leaks down there once the new filter's gone in. Alright, so now the cap's cleaned up, we're going to get the new filter, and hopefully in the bottom of your filter box is a replacement ring. We need to get something like a pick or a little screwdriver on the edge of the old ring here. This one's quite loose and it should just pull off. And the next thing you want to do is just get the new ring a little bit wet with oil. You don't want to coat it with oil, but actually just popping your fingers in there, running that around, will just help it slide past anything on the way in and not become damaged. You also want to try and avoid rolling the ring up. Okay, it wants to go on there fairly straight. And that went on fairly easy. This is quite a loose ring on this particular housing. The new filter, which I've lost down here. Again, make sure it's clear of any grit or dirt, and that should just clip into place. Oh, there it goes, clipped in. So now it's just a case of threading that back down into the housing. Again, be careful pulling it in, because the power steering hose is in the way, so is the air conditioning hose, so you just have to kind of work your way around those. And before you put the socket on to do it up, you want to try and get it going by hand, because the last thing you want to do is cross thread it, damage the threads. So hopefully that feels like it's going in by hand. I'm going to go as tight as I can by hand. Okay, and then I'm going to take my socket contraption back down onto the top and get that done up. Now it does say on the lid a number of foot-pounds torque, but I can't actually get a torque wrench onto this, so I tend to do it up until it's definitely feels like it's on there. At the moment I can feel a bit of a gap between the head, the cap and the housing. And I've actually got my hand around that socket and I'm trying to turn it while adding a bit of extra torque from the end of the socket driver. So now it feels like there's no gap between the head and the housing. I'm just going to see if I can go a little bit more. I can feel a slight gap there. Take this one out, see if I can get a better drive. It really is fiddly. Okay, it's still going. I would definitely recommend before you go far that you check for oil leaks around there. Run a bit of paper around after we filled up. Okay, I think that's in. The new filter is in. Now that we've taken the old filter out, put the new filter in, we'll have to get underneath the engine, drain the oil out. I started with the filter because if you have trouble doing the filter, there's no real point putting new oil in, because if you get the filter out at a later date, you'll want to change that oil again anyway. Okay, let's get under the van. Okay, so now that we've removed the oil filter, we're going to get the oil out. You can see the sump plug is actually on the front of the sump towards the front of the van. Usually they're on the back. That just makes it a little easier. Now if you look at the sump here, we really want a good angle of attack here so we can get the oil to flow out freely. So probably facing uphill would be the worst way to do it. You should really be on a level surface. But I'm actually going to just do it with the van facing downhill. Now the sump plug takes a 19mm spanner or socket. And it shouldn't be done up too tight because you don't want to damage the sump or the nut. But it might just be done up too tight to do by hand. So all I like to do is use a soft hammer. This could be a rubber hammer. I've got a copper hammer here, and the nut needs to turn to the left and we should just be able to tap it until it starts to undo. There we go. Once it's started moving, you'll find it's finger tight. Now again, I'd recommend doing this with the engine cool or very mildly warm. If the oil's hot, you risk burning yourself, you risk melting the container. You should really only do it with the engine just off the ear of cold. It helps the oil flow a little better. Be aware that when this oil starts coming out, it's going to shoot out quite a way. So we want to make sure our container is under there and ready to catch all this oil that's going to drain out. And as I mentioned, there's quite a lot in this vehicle, 8 or 9 litres of the stuff. The local recycling depot doesn't like taking it from me because they think I've got too much. So here it goes, the oil is flowing out. Now typically we will replace this sump plug with a new one, but I tend to reuse them, get a couple of uses out of them, and I will put a little bit of sealer just on the threads when it goes back in to make sure we get a nice oil-proof seal on there. Right, the oil's going to take some time to flow out, so I'm going to leave this container under here. I'm happy this container's big enough to catch all the oil. If you're not happy your container's big enough to catch all the oil, keep an eye on it. You may well need to put this plug back in the sump to stop the oil flowing while you get rid of this container. I'm going to get the sump plug prepared to go back in. I've actually found one in a much better condition. I like to use a little bit of silicone sealant here. This is a proper automotive sealer. You need to make sure it's compatible with both hot areas of the engine and oil contact. Now this one's completely blocked up and I can't actually seem to get it out through here. So just to get a little bit more out of here, I'm going to put a little hole in the side here and just, you know, a little little smidging on the thread. Notice I didn't pull it right at the end of the thread because what I don't want it to do is end up in the engine. And then I just push that into these threads, and then when we go to screw that back in, that'll actually work its way up the thread to the end and just stop any oil from driving out through there. The oil's been draining for over an hour now. You can still see there's a few drips coming out. We're not really going to get to a point that we've got no drips. I guess you could wait a lot longer if you wanted, but what I'm going to do is actually get some paper around there, try not to go in the hole, just remove the majority. You'll see the oil still flowing out fairly freely, and we're just going to have a couple of drips to go onto whatever we've got underneath. I'm going to put some paper just up to that hole, just work around like that so we're relatively clean, and then we're going to get this plug back in with that sealer around it. As you can see, the sealer is driving up around that thread and just filling in that gap where we might end up with a small amount of leak. There is this washer on the end which should be a copper crush washer, which also acts a bit as a seal, but once you've got that sealant in there, that's going to press up into that gap as well and just make sure that's a little bit more secure. Now you see I've done that up finger tight. You don't want to drive it in there with an impact wrench, because if it's cross-threaded you're going to have to buy a new sump. I'm now going to get my 19mm spanner on there, and there are probably torque settings for this. You can look those torque settings up and use your torque wrench. I don't have those settings or a wrench with me at the moment, so again I'm just going to very gently tap the end of this, say very loosely in the hand, tap tap tap. I can see the thing's still moving, and now it's kind of making a noise that makes it sound like it's tight, and that's tight enough really. And again I'm going to clean that up nicely, so when I look under there again, if there's still oil under there, I know that I'm leaking and it's not actually just some oil that I left behind. So we're looking nice and clean under there, and that's that. We're now ready to put some oil back in the engine. Now for the new oil to go in. This is talk about the type of oil that should go in this engine. It's a bit contested online. So the engine, I believe, is spec'd at taking a 506.00 Volkswagen oil. Good luck finding that. I can't seem to find it anywhere in the UK. So what I actually did was I ordered it from a Volkswagen specialist in Germany, 506.00, and they said, yep, that's what they're sending me. And what they've sent me is this oil that has 504.00-507.00, which I'm told by other Volkswagen specialists is not the correct oil. I sometimes use some leading brand oils. I use a 530. There's a big debate whether or not that's the correct oil, whether or not it damages your injectors, whether or not it's suitable for diesel particulate filters. This particular engine doesn't have the diesel particulate filter. I wanted the 506, but I've not got the 506, so I'm going to have to put this in, and yeah, it's either destroying my engine or it's looking after it. I don't know. Bear that in mind. You want to do your own research as to what oil your engine needs. See if you can get that oil. If you have difficulty getting that oil, well, take it to a mechanic. How much oil does this AXD need? Well, online it says it's about 7.4 litres of oil in here, plus about 0.4 of a litre in the filter. So theoretically this should take about 7.8 litres. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out 7 litres very accurately, then I'm going to put the vehicle on the flat, and then I'm going to do a few dipstick measures while adding a few 100 millilitres to get it exactly right. 5 litres can go straight in, no worries. Or about half a litre, a bit missed there. At this point, you want to double check that you've put your filter back in and your sump plug, because if you haven't, you're pouring oil all over your drive at the moment. But in that goes 5 litres. I've contacted the seller to say I'm not sure that it's the correct thing, so I'll see what they say. But they can't have it back now because it's gone in the engine. So 5 litres down, 2 litres to go. The next bit is to accurately measure out 2 more litres. This jug I only use for engine oil, so there's no other contaminants in there. Okay, that's about 7 litres. We could have to put in up to another 800 millilitres or more, but as I say, we'll let that settle down. Before we put it on the level, we're going to try and get this air line back in. It's quite fiddly. You want to make sure the clip is located where it should be. And once the clip is closed, this end should just push in. Now you want to make sure it actually goes snap, because if it doesn't, it's quite likely going to blow itself off. It's lined up, it's gone towards the hole, and you heard it clip. Same with this end, the clip needs to be fully closed, and then we should be able to clip that into place, and you heard that end clip as well. Now this reservoir clips back onto the front of the engine there, and then we've just got to find that nut that we put somewhere safe, and we can do that one back up. Doesn't even need to be done that tight as it's clipped on there, it's just there as a mechanical fixture. Clip that hose back in. Right, now the van's been sat on the level for a while and we've had a couple of minutes for the oil to settle, we can pull that out. We can see the oil level is pretty much where it needs to be actually, just I do like to clean the end up and do best of 3 just to make sure we haven't got false reading. I can see that's spot on that top dash now. I put in another 200 millilitres, so in total I put 7.2 litres of oil in to get us up to there. So there's still a bit more hanging about in the engine, but without taking the sump off, you're never going to get it out. Well, that's it. The van's ready for another year's driving, or 7,000 miles, whichever comes first. Stay tuned if you want to see some other videos covering turbo replacement and exhaust manifold replacement, which are going to be coming in the next couple of months. Well guys, thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this video or found it helpful, made it all the way to the end, please do me a favour and click that subscribe button down here, give me a thumbs up, feel free to comment whatever you like below, it really helps me decide what video I can make in the future.